Some people, those I will call the chronically online, have said that Bukayo Saka has started this season slowly. Even rival fans have piped up about him, including fans of a specific Northwest club who should probably focus on their own wingers. People in glass houses and all that. My response? If 7 goals and assists in 7 games at time of recording is slow, then imagine what he'll be like when he's at full tilt. If anything, it's a compliment. Bukayo Saka, our star boy. I know no one really wants to think about it, but my suspicion is this video might have subconsciously or even consciously piqued your interest because you, like me, are worried. What do we actually do if Bukayo Saka is unavailable, gets an injury, or, dare I say it, needs a break? Trust me, by the law of averages, sod, or whatever law you choose, a day will come when we don't have Saka for a big game. So, we better start preparing for it. I don't know about you, but I feel weirdly protective of Bukayo. He's actually only 4 years younger than me, and I'm sure would find this very patronising if I said this to his face, but there's something strangely, what I'll call parasocially parental, about mine and the wider Arsenal community's relationship with him. There's something nurturing and protective in the way Arsenal fans talk about Bukayo, even first naming him, that I don't think other players get. In less verbose language, when Bukayo scores, I feel like a proud dad. And I know many others do too. There is something of a family aspect to his path at Arsenal. Having come through Hale End, we've collectively seen him grow literally from a teenager, trying to break into the game, to one of the greatest players in the Premier League, and arguably his country's most important player. We're not his parents, unless you're watching Mr. and Mrs. Saka, in which case, hello, well done. But I do feel a palpable sense of pride. But with our pride comes doubt. With every kick from a left back who can't deal with him, I wince. What if he gets injured? What if we're burning him out? What if he gets one kick too many? The first thing to say, which is very important, is that what Saka is doing in terms of time on the pitch isn't unhealthy or not normal, as some fans say. Top players play a lot. That's a fact. Looking at last season, Saka actually played less minutes in the Premier League than 27 other players in the league, with 3,191, less than Declan Rice, Mo Salah, Bruno Fernandes, and Harry Kane. All of Ødegaard, Trent, Rodri, Son, Rashford, Van Dijk, and Gabriel Martinelli played over 2,800 minutes. Mikel spoke last season a number of times on the idea that the best players play every 3 days, and putting any other idea into Bukayo's mind is only limiting him. Considering he also has a pretty remarkable injury record, I think his minute numbers make sense. Fair point from Mikel, I say, but the usual retort to that is something along the lines of, but isn't it more about the minutes into his legs at such a young age? How many careers have we seen where a player burst onto the scene, Micah Richards, only for injuries, unsustainable expectations, or just their bodies giving up, meant they didn't hit the heights in their peak that so many hoped for? Wilshere, anyone? It sounds mad, but there's an argument Bukayo is 8 to 10 years away from his peak when you look at Salah's output numbers in the position, and more broadly, even if he comes inside later in his career, as I suspect, players are retiring later. He has a long way to go, and it's a marathon, not a sprint. So is he doing too much too soon? Well, there you might have a case. This is a chart looking at senior minutes played before a player's 20th birthday by @LouOrns on X. Saka is above a lot of very, very successful footballers here. The truth is, Saka's played a lot of minutes at a very young age. And we don't, or can't really, have a massive precedent for what happens when you load a player that much, that young, in the modern era. Despite the massive leaps forward in treatment, recovery and injury prevention, and the reporting that Saka looks after himself impeccably well, looking at the current over 30s near him in terms of minutes played, you can make a decent argument that all of their peaks came fairly early in Rooney, Neymar and Hazard. Look at Raheem Sterling. Explosive start to his career, should be firing on all cylinders for club and country at his age, but appears to have tailed off a bit. I mean, Chelsea tax, sure, but is that destined to happen to Bukayo? Honestly, looking at Sterling at Chelsea, I don't think it's that his legs have gone. I just think it takes a ridiculous amount of mental strength to stay eating right, training right, and performing at the level he was at. And only the top 1% of the 1%, the freaks like Ronaldo and Messi, can do that at a consistent level for 20 years. Raheem himself has admitted that he's been adjusting his off-field approach over the last few years, and it remains to be seen if Bukayo can maintain the level. That's more my concern than anything else, as Bukayo's game isn't really reliant on his pace, though he does have it. So there's the numbers contextualising this all. But now, we need to answer the question. Broadly, I see 2 ways of approaching this. Try and approximate what Saka does, or go with something completely different. But before that, let's outline the broad brushstrokes of what Saka's profile actually is, so we know what we're trying to replace. Or not, as the case may be. Elite 1v1 capacity to combine around the side of a block and manipulate lines. Top level box movement and finishing, arguably off both feet now. Capacity to receive wide from all angles and pass types. Facility to stretch the game by holding width and the ability to come inside to combine, and the game IQ to know when to do which. intensity in the press, strong tackling technique, discipline out of possession to hold position, and combine in the press with others. Combination play, specifically with White and Ødegaard. Option 1, Jesus. Based on that list of skills, I think Gabby Jesus is the closest analogue we have to Saka in the squad. I don't think he has the same level 1v1, his finishing isn't as hot, and I don't trust his ability from wide to know when to drive inside or crash the box as well as Saka, but he's the closest. He has that Saka-esque ability to roll contact. His deliveries from wide areas have always surprised me, and he's just that wriggly, chaotic player who will provide you intensity in the press. The downside, and there will always be a downside in non-optimal solutions, is that you take him away from centre forward. You also don't allow him to drift to his preferred side, the left, and you restrict some of his facilitative freedom, which can spring the rest of the attack to life. But if you play with, say, a Kai Havertz as your 9 and ask him to drift out to the right, something he did a lot at Chelsea, you could gain some of that back as Jesus works his way in field. Option 2, Reiss Nelson. Being right-footed, it would be a different way of approaching it, but I don't think that's wrong as such. I rate Nelson more highly 1v1 than Jesus, so if you had an opponent with a poor quality or non-traditional left fullback when there might be space to exploit, those two things maybe mean you go for this. It also means your best centre-forward isn't out of position. Reiss is a little less cute round the corners and in tight spaces, and a bit more straight lines for me, but again, with a Havertz on the end of crosses, I think this could really work. Personally, I prefer Reiss on the left. He's able to drive inside on his right foot, and what I love is how early he does it. Sometimes Martinelli ends up trying to access the penalty box around the back of defenders or the byline, but Reiss loves driving in early, and it causes a lot of teams issues. We don't have many attacking carriers. But on the right, he's not out of the question. I wonder whether he could be easily shown wide and asked to deliver crosses, which isn't really his game, but I love a shoot-on-sight, tricky customer type with his fast feet. His numbers are really, really good, by the way, even though this is a small sample size. More broadly, I think we are sleeping on Reiss a little bit. Option 3, Vieira. Stylistically, probably the least Saka-esque, but his intelligence makes him a standout candidate on this. It's probably my least favourite option of the three so far in terms of non-specific game states and just replacing Saka outright, as you lose the ability to drive at your man at the most elite level. He's a little loose under contact still for me, and I still have some question marks on his finishing, but in terms of deliveries from wide, holding width, combining, driving inside, and knowing when to stay and go, I rate Vieira to go and give us a very different option, especially in a game state when we have a lot of the ball and are chasing a winner or an equaliser. Especially as a left footer, if he had the support runs of Ben White to create space, he could be seriously dangerous. Again, might be a guy you need to ask a Jesus or a Havertz to find times to swap with so he can come a little more central, but I think that's true to a greater or lesser extent with all of these guys to maximise their capacity, even Saka. I want to see Vieira given more time in the right half space anyway. So if you had him as a nominal winger, but his main role was to access that zone and send balls into the box, he could cook, as the kids say. And they do say that. I'm 26. Option 4, rip it up. You could also not do any of that. There's a version of this where Arsenal play with split strikers and ask their 8s to provide the width, situation dependent. People have talked about the diamond midfield, why not try it? I don't mind it, but there's a reason Mikel and a lot of his contemporaries play with their wingers or a fullback high and wide to create their lanes of attack. You stretch the defence and create a consistent outball. You could also just change the right-sided role altogether and make it more of a Rashford type. Out wide, out of possession, but moving into those inside forward channels when the ball's in the second phase. Instruction is always worth a go, but this Arsenal team are used to a certain type of ball-to-feet winger on that side, hugging the touchline and build-up, and you don't feel that's likely to be an easy fit. The real point here, though, is this. Saka is the optimal solution. He gives you absolutely everything you could want from a winger and more. He is a unicorn profile, elite in all phases and only getting better, which in a way is the problem. He's so good that the market isn't going to solve this one. A player to replace him at 100% doesn't exist, and if they did, they certainly wouldn't sign for Arsenal knowing Bukayo Saka plays in their position. So we need to find different ways to get to the same answer. Because across the pitch otherwise, we are beginning to develop different ways of answering those questions without certain players. With no Martin Ødegaard, although there would need to be adaptations in the right pod, and you're of course limited in some ways, you feel Fabio Vieira could do a near enough job and add his own specialities in other areas. You might ask a White or a Rice to step up and provide a bit more of a link, as Vieira will drop less than Ødegaard, but he might be even more of a risk from the right half space in terms of his crossing than Martin. With no William Saliba, you lose a lot, but now you feel with White and Tomiyasu, we still have the capacity to play a high line, an approximation of build-up quality with White's terrific passing range, and we can defend with near enough the same level of quality, especially as I think White's defending is better centrally. With no Jesus, we can get by with a combination of Havertz, Trossard and Nketiah. You get an approximation of outcomes, 90-95% of what you get from your first teamers. But Saka still feels like that one where if he's out, a solution that we've seen that comes close to the outcomes that we get with him on the pitch just doesn't feel there. I still feel we'd only get 60-70% of what he does, and that's a problem. Negotiating the child-to-parent relationship into an adult-to-adult one is always hard, and part of it is learning to live without one another. Someday, by the law of averages, and I'm certainly not wishing it into existence, the Arsenal family will have to do just that without our proverbial son, Bukayo Saka. If you like The Different Knock and want to see more, you can access our bonus content on Patreon and YouTube memberships for just £3 a month.